Hello, this is Mark Tooley, editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American Foreign Policy, as well as president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, speaking with my fellow editor, Marc LiVecche, in Oxford, England, as the latest installment of our ongoing conversation called Marksism, the Good Kind. So Mark, how is life and how is society in Oxford, England this week?
It is good. It is hectic. So my children just finished school today. Both of them turned in their musical instruments and their textbooks and all of that. So we finished late here. They've been at home, of course, because England is also on lockdown, but they finally were able to go to campus today and to turn in their things. So it is finally summer vacation. And if I panned my camera, which I won't do, you would see all our packing crates and boxes and all of that, because we are making our own sort of little exodus in a week and a half. And on July 14th, we'll be returning to America. So life is good. Life is hectic.
Well, for listeners who are not aware of your personal history, of course, you're concluding a two-year program or fellowship with the MacDonald Center there at Oxford, working alongside the great just war scholar Nigel Biggar, about which you'll speak later. But first of all, let's chat a little bit further about someone else there in Britain, the historian Tom Holland, with whom I conversed on behalf of Providence several days ago about his blockbuster new book, Dominion, How Christianity Transformed the Western Mind and the World, very much a riposte to pessimistic Christians, especially in America, who see only the gloom of Christianity's supposed retreat and defeat, but in fact, he sees Christianity's triumph everywhere, in the sense that even its adversaries and critics are now operating off of largely Christian premises about justice and human equality. Daniel Strand reviewed Dominion for Providence, so we discussed that a little bit a couple of weeks ago, but I thought the interview with Tom Holland was fascinating and could easily have talked to him for hours more, but what did you glean from it, Marc LiVecche?
Well, you look like a fanboy. You look like you were having a good time. I was much impressed.
Well, I told him I'm in love with his book, and by extension, in love with him. So he took that with typical British reserve.
Middle-class British reserve. It was like him being in the charismatic hall up on his hill.
Right.
Right. So I thought it was a great interview. I think Tom Holland, I sent you a link, and people should check it out. Maybe we could post it in the little program notes. I sent you a link to an interview that he had done with the also great N.T. Wright on Paul, and it was on it must be a British-based podcast or video cast show called Unbelievable. And I think the host of Unbelievable wasn't entirely sure what would happen if you put N.T. Wright and Tom Holland in the same room, if they would have a completely friendly conversation, or if it would be at all adversarial. He expected it would be respectful in any case, but they were seeing largely eye to eye, and they talked a lot about the thesis for his book Dominion, in which, as you've already said, he sees Christianity as triumphant across Western civilization, so much so that, like the proverbial fish in water, those of us who have been the beneficiaries of Western civilization don't even see sometimes, unless we know to look for it, the influence of Christianity. And that's the good news. I think the reverse of it, which he doesn't talk about too much, but he hinted at it a little bit, the reverse of that is, as people dechristianize, what happens? And so you live in a society that is influenced by Christianity, and so we still have yearnings for justice. We still want to love our neighbors. We have all of this Christian inheritance, but if it's no longer grounded in a Hebraic soil, what does it start to look like? Christianity is both a goad, a catalyst, but also a hedge. And I think in different places you see us losing some of the limits that Christianity puts on things like the pursuit of justice, I think another Englishman, John Donne, said it's the heresies that men leave that they most hate. And as people leave Christianity, or increasingly leave a Christianized sensibility, I think you see something like a hatred for that which they find anathema to the things that they believe they stand for, even, as Tom Holland points out, even those things that they owe to Christianity.
He commented, and no doubt you've seen this yourself in your own European experiences, that as Europe becomes more quote unquote secular, it increasingly defines itself by what it's against, which the ultimate evil has been Hitler and the Third Reich and Nazism. So whatever the Nazis would do, that's we must do the opposite. So
right.
I suppose that's a positive if one doesn't have Christianity directly to operate off of.
It is a positive, right? I mean, who can stand opposed to those who stand against Hitler? The problems is the people that, for example, let's take as they've been called the wokerati. Who are the people that the wokerati think are now following in the footsteps of Hitler? They get it right much of the time. So the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, the people that are Hitler-esque, great that they stand against them. But again, when their Christian sensibilities, like a yearning for justice, is ungrounded in a Hebraic soil, they start to look around and they see all sorts of people who they think look like Nazis. And so, good thing to stand against Hitler. But when you start seeing Hitler in the face of your neighbor who is equally opposed to Hitler, you just don't see it. Then it begins to have all sorts of problems. So, for Christians who want to try to make a nuanced argument against the validity of whatever, homosexual marriage or the transgender movement, people of good intention who yearn for equality and yearn for justice will see some of that as the shadows of Hitlerism. And so, great that we stand against Hitler, but we got to get our descriptions right, and I don't think the wokerati always do.
I quoted to him what Reinhold Niebuhr said in one of the first issues of Christianity Crisis magazine, that the Third Reich was the first revolution against Christianity, which when I first read that Niebuhr quote, I thought, well, the French Revolution and the Bolshevik revolutions would have been against Christianity. But
right.
I think that Tom Holland rightly points out that, in fact, even those revolutions were operating off of Christian premises in terms of seeking human equality and striving to help the downtrodden.
That's right.
Obviously, with themselves great cruelty and great calamities, but Nazism obviously rejected the whole premise of helping the downtrodden and exalted strength and cruelty. So as we look at the world today, is there any political competitor directly challenging these premises of Christianity? I can't really think of one. Even Islam and Islamism is basically a heresy of Christianity. Right. Communism is sort of a heresy of Christianity. I can't really think of a direct, overt political challenge unless, again, one looks at neo-fascists who, fortunately, remain very marginal in Europe and elsewhere.
Right. No, I think that's right. I think, this probably isn't exhaustively true, but one senses that a lot of the neo-fascists nowadays are a little bit lukewarm, which, thank God, but they don't quite seem to have the vigor of their forebears. Holland seemed to gesture toward China as being, it's certainly not on par, maybe malevolently, but in terms of being a rising power that is non-Christianized. It'd be interesting to know how that plays out with the prevalence of the underground church and the number of Chinese Christians. But that would be an interesting thesis to get a group of China scholars and missiologists together to discuss. I don't know that I see one. Catholic thinker Gil Bailey, who I've talked about on occasion, he and Josh Mitchell share sort of a Girardian sensibility regarded catharsis and the fact that everything is, as Holland even pointed out, at the end of the day, a religious conflict. He saw, much like Holland, only a handful of options really for human beings in terms of the kind of ideology that they're going to pursue. And I think I'm looking at my notes, I'm trying to find what Holland said. Holland said that human beings are increasingly going to choose between either being secular humanists, so progressives, and that either they will triumph, or we're going to return to this Nietzscheanism, this, the quest for the Übermensch, so the fascist ideology, or there's going to be something like a Christian reconversion, which quite intriguingly, he suggested that he himself has embarked upon, which, may it be so. Gil Bailey casts similar options. He uses the, again, I should know this because I was a literature major, either the American, I think she was an American, Sylvia Plath was an American poetess, is that right? She married a Brit, I think that's what it is. But in her diary, Sylvia Plath was lamenting the fact that in her own life, she felt a lack of ballast, that she was empty, no real ontological weight to herself. And she had suggested that there were three options that she was looking at. And one of them she listed as smoking opium. The second was original sin. And a third was adoring Hitler. And Gil Bailey recasts these as smoking opium is escapist self-delusion, original sin is Christian anthropology and a return to it. But this idea of adoring Hitler is simply an embrace of ideological fanaticism. Again, saying that's a religious quest, because the ideological fanatic is trying to answer the questions of the basic questions of the religious impulse. Who am I? Where did I come from? What went wrong? Right? We all sense that something's gone wrong. Who can fix it? When will they? So these are irresistibly religious questions. And Plath, like all of us, are trying to find a ground to answer those questions. So this idea of ideological fanaticism, if it's not strictly fascist, I think you do start to see that in certain strains of Islamic fundamentalism, where there is again, it is indelibly Christian. I think you're right on that. But you even see a tier away. You see Islam generally, and then you see within Islam this rabid fundamentalism, and maybe something like that, an absolute unwillingness to to release power. In your piece on the 4th of July, you note, and I think Christianity has given America this impulse, but there's almost a canonic impulse in the founders. They emptied themselves of a certain dimension of power. And you're only going to see that in Christianity, I think. And Islamic fundamentalism doesn't do that. So maybe that's the closest that I would say we have to a kind of Hitlerism. But even that is not, purely de-Christianized, but I don't know.
Well, these last 2 years, Mark, you've been working with one of the great Christian scholars, Nigel Bigger there at Oxford. Tell us a little bit about that experience and what you've gained from it.
Yeah, so 3 years ago now, we were all minding our own business, teaching I think a group of interns a seminar on just war in the IRD office, the old IRD office. And in the crowd was a guy named Peter MacDonald. Peter MacDonald is the son of now the late Alonzo MacDonald, who is a little bit of a Forrest Gump character, in that if you look at his biography, he has known everybody, he's done a little bit of everything. But some decades back, Alonzo MacDonald converted to Christianity and did so with a convert's zeal, and he found his way to Rome, became a Catholic, and started at some point an organization called the Agape MacDonald Foundation that supports distinguished scholars for Christ in the secular academy. And the idea is simply that Christians need support in the academy, and they have a role to play in the academy that's sometimes increasingly hostile to that role. And they just look for scholars to support and to find occasions to build and all of that. I was something of a new project in that I would hardly call myself distinguished, hopefully sort of in nascent form. But Peter had been reading Providence. In fact, a guy, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but Mark Maurice, he was the one who was originally reading Providence, and he heard that I was going to Oxford under Nigel's invitation just to give a lecture on Reinhold Niebuhr and whether or not realpolitik could be ethical. Mark Maurice got wind of this, sent Peter to check me out. They liked what they saw. They asked if I could benefit from some time to focus on writing. And Nigel and I put our heads together and came up with the idea of my coming to Oxford to be the visiting research scholar at the MacDonald Center for Theology, Ethics, and Public Life, which is an institute that the MacDonald Center supports and Nigel Bigger directs. It's just housed at Christ Church College in Oxford, and it provides an opportunity for a number of scholars to come, have a place to work, to interact with Nigel and the other scholars at Oxford. We set up a 2-year plan, and you and your former co-editor, Robert Nicholson, were gracious enough to release me from my managerial tasks at Providence to come over and publish my dissertation, which is now forthcoming with Oxford University Press. We've talked about that a number of times. It's called The Good Kill, Just War and Moral Injury. Spent the first year or so getting that out and doing a number of papers and conferences at military ethics programs here in the UK, in the States, and in Europe. Really just an opportunity to build my own scholarship and publish and get to know Nigel a little bit better. I think our secret ambition is I come back to America, and without the British accent, I do what Nigel Bigger's done, which is to continually intersect Christian realism with public life. For me, primarily in the military dimension, Nigel's been a little bit more widespread, but I'll find other animating subjects as well. But that's been the last 2 years, and I've got I'm working out a draft of another book that looks at some of the harder questions within Christian realism. How does Christian realism react, for instance, to the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima? So it's been 2 pretty incredible years, sort of like a 2-year sabbatical at the world's best university. So it's been good, but it's at an end.
And now you're heading to an institution related to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland.
That's right. So US Naval Academy, Annapolis, Maryland. Happy to go on board as a Stockdale research fellow in the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership. And it's a 1-year program for now. We'll research 2 subjects, intelligence gathering and gray zone operations. And at the end of the academic term, there is something called the McCain Conference, which we convene to sort of deliver a set of papers based on the research project with invited scholars and the Stockdale Fellows as well. A second thing I'll be doing, I'll be in the ethics or the Department for Leadership, Ethics, and Law. I'll teach a course on Christian realism in the spring, using a lot of the Providence material, as well as co-editing a new textbook that the Naval Academy will be using and an instructor's guide to accompany it for all the second-year midshipmen taking their core ethics program. So it's a great opportunity to invest in naval education, the education of future naval officers and Marine Corps officers. So pretty excited about that, but I'll be continuing my activities as executive editor here at Providence, or there at Providence. I don't know geographically where we're at, with Providence. So that's the past, that's the future.
And continuing your project of renovating political theology and American Protestantism, at least for the next 25 years, which should be long enough to complete the good work.
We should get it done, I think. Absolutely.
People can be forewarned right now. It's coming.
That's right. That's exactly right. So.
All right, Marc LiVecche, fellow editor of Providence, thank you for another good conversation, and we'll be seeing you physically soon.
But happy 4th of July also.
And happy Independence Day. I hope it's being celebrated vigorously there in England.
I am sure it is. I will sound the trumpets.